Hello, everybody. So today we're going to talk about the zero COVID policy in China that is now causing protests across the country. So Sunil, people watching this might be thinking, well, why on earth is COVID still a big issue in China?
It does seem strange, doesn't it, when you think about maybe how long it is since you wore a face mask or something like that. The picture's been very different in China. And I guess that was the result of a deliberate policy that rather than rely on vaccinations and a degree of the problem just spreading through society, that they would really try and restrict it very tightly, when individuals had positive test, isolation and so on. So I think that has been the source of a real difference. And it just has persisted. The policy has been going on without a break really since 2020. And we can talk about the pluses and minuses, but I think maybe those are the factors that have kept it on the agenda and maybe meant that the vaccinations and so on haven't been as important to their policy.
So clearly people are really unhappy with the restrictions that have been put in place, but what actually are they? Because obviously we had lockdowns in our country. What makes it so challenging and difficult in China?
Well, I think the two key differences from what we all got used to were firstly the severity for individuals. So, for example, if you test positive, you kind of can't leave the house. You can't go food shopping. You can't go for a walk around the block. The whole social distancing thing isn't really a kind of a key part of the policy. And so obviously that's much tougher for individuals. And let's say you're a Chinese national, you come back from traveling abroad, you're then isolating in a government hotel for 10 days maybe. And again, that's a lot tougher than what we got used to in the UK. The other point is scope. So for example, if you can imagine lots of urban China, people live in big apartment blocks. One positive case in the block means the whole block is subject to the same restrictions, which is much tougher, I think, than what we got used to.
And as a result, we've seen the public in China literally throwing rocks at people in white hazmat suits, these government officials. So people are not happy. But if we go back to the policy in itself, has that been successful?
Well, in one sense, it has. I mean, if you look at just number of reported cases in China, huge country, they reported about 1.5 million cases. By way of contrast, the US has a population which is maybe a quarter of the size. They've reported nearly 100 million cases. And you've had a knock-on in terms of number of fatalities and so on. So in that sense, successful. I guess on the other side of the ledger, 2 points. Firstly, the cost in terms of a drawn-out drag on the economy, because people literally can't go out and spend, go on holiday travel and so on, has been quite material. And I think the other key point is what we saw in the West is that going tighter earlier didn't necessarily help if it meant that you were just more exposed when you reopened. And given China's limited success in terms of getting particularly older people vaccinated, that's the big unknown. We still don't know as they reopen how much of a future problem is that going to create.
And clearly these restrictions have a big impact on the economy as well. It's certainly something that we felt in Europe and the UK. So how long can we really expect these strict COVID measures to be in place in China?
Well, it was a key question when they finished their party congress where Xi was reappointed for the third term about would they say anything about easing. Our understanding was that they probably would look to ease post the congress. They didn't say anything at the time, and the language has still remained quite tough, but the policies on the ground started to ease. And I think the base case which we had then that hasn't really been changed is that we'll continue to see very gradual easing, maybe not so much in a city that has a new outbreak, but in the rest of the country. And then by the time you're getting into the second quarter of next year, you might actually start to notice that in terms of more economic activity, good news for company profits and so on. I think that's one of the reasons why, if we think about markets for a second, why China emerging markets have started to perform a little bit better. We were very cautious on them earlier in the year. Now our views are a bit more neutral. I think this reopening theme can continue for a while. It's helpful for the global economy at a time when Europe might be in recession. So that's good news. I think the key question for China in the future is going to be some of the other challenges, particularly what seems to be the political decoupling from the West and the US in particular. Does that prove to be a longer term headwind even after they've reopened?
Sunil, look, as interesting as always, a topic I'm sure will be continuing to monitor really closely. So thanks again. And of course, thanks everyone for watching. And we'll be back again next week with another episode.